Everyone, and welcome to today's live stream. I have got an interesting topic to talk about today. And, last week I talked about why is raising goats so hard and why do so many people fail and decide to quit. So if you missed that video and you feel like raising goats is a challenge, go back and find that video, and I talk in there about why raising goats appears to be so hard. So today I am going to talk about why cheese making appears to be so hard. And then I thought, hey, next week, why don't I talk about why soap making appears to be so hard? Because these are all things that seem like they should be super easy. I know, when it came to like raising our own food, I thought, people have been doing this since the dawn of agriculture. So how hard can it be, right? Like you just stick goats out in the pasture and they'll take care of themselves. And you come back and you milk them and you make cheese. And unfortunately, none of it is really that easy. If you've been following me for a while, you know that when we started raising goats in 2002, we had lots of problems. And I don't talk about this as much, but we also had lots of problems making cheese. And I shouldn't say we, because I started out as the cheesemaker of the family. And it took me about 5 years to make a reliably good cheese. For me to say, all right, y'all, I'm going to make cheddar today. Or not cheddar, I'm sorry. My husband's the hard cheesemaker. Chev even, I'm going to make Chev today. And to know that it was going to actually turn out to be something that was good, that everybody would want to eat. And it would be the right consistency and all of that stuff. So I'm going to talk today about the main reasons that people fail to make consistently good cheese. Or maybe you've done it 5 or 6 times and you've never met with success. So I'm here to tell you that it is not impossible. I have taught literally thousands of people to make cheese through the years, including several hundred children who came to the farm camp on our farm back in the teen years, 16, 17, 18. We had about 100 children there every year, and every single one of them made mozzarella successfully. And I've also had dozens of in-person classes with adults where people have made cheese too. So, and then I've got the online course now at Thrifty Homesteader Academy where I teach people to make cheese, and we have lots of successful students in there. So the number one reason that a lot of people have a problem making cheese is because they have the wrong recipe. And that basically means they have a recipe that's really not a cheese recipe at all. Who knows where these things come from? But in my University of Massachusetts class, it's actually a requirement now that you use a recipe from my book, Raising Goats Naturally, that book. Because the first few years I taught the class, I had so many students that would find a recipe on the internet and it would just flop miserably. And in fact, a lot of times, like I would look at the recipe and they turned the whole assignment in at once. If they had showed me the recipe before they made it, I would have said, oh my goodness, no, this is not going to work. I don't know who this person is or what they think they're doing or why they've put this out there, but this is not going to work. Like I will never forget the student who found a YouTube video that showed that was how to make mozzarella without rennet, which is impossible. Like rennet is what makes cheese melt. Mozzarella melts, right? Like you eat a pizza and you're like, oh, stringy, melty mozzarella, right? If you don't have rennet, your cheese is not going to melt. So, and that's in my book. But apparently, I don't think I guess he didn't read that chapter very carefully, because if he had read that, he would have known, oh, it's impossible to make mozzarella or any melting cheese without rennet. So there's crazy things like this out there online, and you can't make a cheese if you don't have the right recipe, because I mean, that's impossible. That's like saying, I'm going to go to Cincinnati and somebody gives you a map of California. You cannot get to Cincinnati with a map of California. And that's the same thing. Like if you have a recipe that's not accurate, it's impossible to come up with the cheese correctly. So what if you are using a recipe that you know is 100% accurate? Like the recipes in this book have been followed by thousands of people. We've made these cheeses. I did the math the other day. Our family has made the mozzarella more than 1,000 times because we do weekly pizza nights, so 20 years times 52 weeks, that's over 1,000. And we're actually, April's going to be 22 years. And so, we've made a lot of mozzarella, so I know how to make that stuff. So the problem though is, so if you have a recipe that works, then number 2 mistake would be not following that recipe to the letter. And this was my mistake. I'll raise my hand here and tell you I am guilty, because I grew up in a house that didn't even have measuring spoons or measuring cups. And we certainly didn't have a kitchen scale. Okay. So I grew up cooking by just eyeballing everything and throwing it into a pot. And so when I started making cheese, I just didn't think that these little details were important. And I didn't realize how important it is that you absolutely follow the recipes. And so I didn't follow the recipes very carefully. That's why it took me 5 years to reliably make a good chev or other cheeses, is because I wasn't following the recipe exactly. And also the other thing is that every batch of cheese is like its own little science experiment. And so you need to keep a cheese journal. And in my class, I have a couple of, in my online class on Thrifty Homesteader Academy, I have a few different ideas for how you can do that. I've got a form that you can use. My husband has a notebook where he keeps track of all of the cheddar. This is especially important if you want to make hard cheeses. But I tell you right now, I could have shortened my learning curve on making a good chev by months if I had kept a cheese journal. And then I would have seen like, oh, okay, well, this cheese that's all mushy and not draining properly, I didn't put it into the molds until 18 hours after I added the culture. But this cheese over here that I put in the mold after 10 hours came out perfect. If I would have been writing all that down, I would have figured out what I needed to do to make the cheese the same every time, but I didn't. So it's, and the problem too and for me with that, and for a lot of people, is that I was looking at too many sources. There are a gazillion people out there that have instructions for making chev. And one of the reasons I thought it wasn't important is because some recipes said anything from 10 hours to 24 hours. So I thought, oh, it must not be important because this person says 24 hours, this person says 18 hours, this person says 12 hours, this person says 10 hours. So the amount of time, like whatever's convenient for me is what I'm going to do, right? Wrong. It took me forever to actually see the correlation between the amount of time that the amount of time involved between putting the culture into the milk and putting it into the mold, to realize, oh, if I want the perfect chev, it should not be done before 10 hours or after 12 hours. Like 10 to 12 hours is the magic spot for making the perfect chev. So 10 to 12 hours after I put the culture into the milk is when I'm going to put it into the mold. And then it's going to drain perfectly. It's going to be a perfect spreadable consistency, and it's going to be awesome. Instead, it was like, I would just do whatever's convenient. So, if I think about making cheese at 3:00 in the afternoon, well, I'm not going to get up at 3 a.m. to put cheese in the mold. So I would wait until I got up the next morning, milk the goats and stuff. So by the time I get it in the mold, it's been 18 hours. And it wouldn't drain as well as it did if I had done it after 10 or 12 hours. So it's really important to understand that when you make cheese, you have to follow the instructions for the recipe very carefully. Keep track of what you're doing. And then when you make changes, they have to be very purposeful. It's like, you can't just go, oh, I think I'm going to do X, Y, Z. Like you can't take my mozzarella recipe and say, oh, this other recipe cuts the curds in their mozzarella, so I'm going to cut the curds in mine. It doesn't work that way. like you have to follow a single recipe from the beginning to end. And then if something's not perfect and you know that you've followed everything, then you need to know what needs to be done differently to figure that out. So like that's one of the things that we do in my cheese making course, because there's a discussion thread and people can post photos of what their cheese looked like and then all the details and what they did. And then we can figure out like, okay, what did you do incorrectly that you need to do correctly next time, or what went wrong? And so that's when we get into number 3 reason why you may not be able to successfully make cheese or get consistently good results every time you do it. And that is the wrong ingredients. And there's actually, I've got actually 4 things here. I started out, I made a little list so I can be organized. So there's actually 4 things here. Number 1 is milk that has been overheated. Now, if you're buying milk from the store, do not buy ultra pasteurized milk. So you have to look on the label, and if it just says pasteurized, you're okay. If it says UHT, that stands for ultra high temperature, don't get that. That means it's been heated to 280 degrees under pressure. So all the proteins have been denatured. It will not turn into cheese or yogurt. So you're doomed to fail right there. It's not going to work. But you can overheat milk yourself. So, on a homestead, people get busy and, depending on what cheese we make, we may or may not pasteurize it. So if I'm going to make chev, or yogurt, we pasteurize it because we have found that we get the best results with pasteurized milk with our milk on our farm. Other people have had different results. So I think it depends on what kind of natural bacteria you have in your milk. And I'm not talking bad bacteria. Culture is a bacteria. Milk has bacteria in it. And so sometimes it's better than others. Whatever we've got on our farm, if we're going to make yogurt or chev, we will get the best results if we pasteurize the milk before making the cheese. So the challenge there, because in the beginning, we just had an old-fashioned dial thermometer, like the restaurant thermometers. You get them a couple bucks at any store that has kitchen supplies. And I use, I don't have one on my desk. I usually have one. I use, well, this is a big one here. I can show you. So I use a binder clip. I put this on the side of the pot, and then I would stick the stem of the thermometer through here, and then it hangs down into the milk. And that way I can do stuff in the kitchen and keep an eye on the thermometer to make sure. So when it gets to the right temperature for all the pasteurization stuff, I can turn off the heat. Well, sometimes you get busy on a farm, or back when my kids were little, sometimes your kids call you, Mom. So you have to go do something. I could not even tell you how many times I have boiled over milk on my stove before I discovered this fantastic invention called a digital thermometer. And it has an alarm on it. So you can set it to go off when it reaches a certain temperature. So that has saved me so many batches of cheese. Because what happens is if the milk boils over, then it's too, you've damaged the protein, and it's not really good for anything at that point except queso blanco, and probably yogurt. But typically what we would do is if it boiled over, I'd be like, ugh. So I just grab the vinegar and I'm like, all right, well, I was going to make chev with this, but looks like queso blanco again, or ricotta. I also have a ricotta recipe that I use with vinegar. So, then I'd add my wine vinegar or champagne vinegar to the milk, and voila, we've got ricotta or queso blanco for the day instead of chev. So if your milk gets overheated and you try to make a hard cheese with it, you might not be that successful. So the second ingredient problem you can have is that if your rennet is old or your culture is old, The only place I recommend for beginners, there's two places I recommend that I know I have used. For beginners, I highly recommend Ricky, um, New England cheesemaking.com. They're fantastic for beginners because they sell cultures in these little packets that look like sugar packets. So it's all pre-measured. It's made for people doing small batches of 2 gallons or less. And so it's perfect for people who don't have a real dairy. If you are making cheese like multiple times a week, then you can buy from the Dairy Connection, but they have much larger quantities. And they even say right on there, like, we're not responsible for you not knowing how much to use and not measuring it correctly and stuff. There's some kind of a disclaimer on their stuff. So anyway, you don't want, one of the biggest problems is that, people buy rennet or culture and then it gets too old. So whenever we purchase rennet or culture, we use a Sharpie and we put the date on the package or the bottle so that we know when we got it and that it better be used up within 2 years. But what if I've had students before who are like, well, but I just bought this 6 months ago. And the question there is, who did you buy it from? Because if you bought it from somebody who does not turn over their inventory really fast, maybe it was sitting in their inventory for a year or 2 years before they sold it. And they don't want to lose money, so they're not going to throw it away. And they're assuming that you'll never guess that the reason your cheese failed is because the products were old. So the other thing is, so this is like 2A or 2B. In terms of rennet, do not buy junket rennet from the store. You cannot buy cheese rennet and cheese culture at your grocery store. You have to purchase them online or from a shop that specializes in fermentation. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, maybe an Amish grocery store, but I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. Again, though, you got to ask yourself, how fast do they sell this stuff? And is it fresh? Back when we were doing classes on our farm, and which we're going to do again. So yay. So all of you who keep messaging me and saying, when are you going to start doing classes on your farm again in Illinois? The answer is 2024. And so when we were doing classes on the farm, we did sell rennet and culture. We would get it from cheesemaking.com because we had a wholesale account with them, and we would get it from them and we would sell it all within 6 months. So I felt really good about that. But when we quit doing classes on the farm in 2020, I won't sell it anymore because I don't want to deal with, I didn't want to deal with shipping something, because rennet and culture need to stay at the correct temperature. And so that's number 3, is that your rennet, if you make your cheese and it doesn't firm up the way that it should, then there could be something wrong with your rennet. And rennet needs to be kept in the refrigerator. If you freeze your rennet, that will ruin it. One of my students put her rennet in the freezer and she couldn't make cheese with it anymore. So she bought some new rennet. It all worked fine. Culture needs to be stored in the freezer. Rennet needs to be stored in the refrigerator. And this is very, very, very important. If you mess this up, your culture and your rennet is not going to work. And the thing about the culture is, if your culture doesn't work, that gets really tricky. So, a lot of people say they want to be completely self-reliant. They don't want to be buying cultures. And so they get instructions for making a mother culture because they're like, I'm just going to keep making my own culture over and over again. We tried that. And after, I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 batches of cheddar that literally tried to like blow up our cheese press. we realized it was because our mother culture had gone bad. So the tricky thing, because and don't hold me to these numbers exactly. This is just an example of how it is not easy to work with mother cultures and create your own cultures. Because this was over 15 years ago when we did this. But we decided we wanted to be all self-reliant and make our own cultures. And so we did. We created a mother culture, and we made ice cubes of culture and put them in the freezer. And of course, I mean, they're ice cubes in the freezer. So we kept them in the freezer at the correct temperature. And I don't remember the exact time. The first batches worked fine, but after a month or 6 weeks or so, we made a batch. And so when you make cheddar, you put cheddar in the mold, and you set your pressure gauge at a certain weight. And we did that. And thankfully, we were in the kitchen because somebody glanced over and saw that the pressure gauge was literally off the chart. Like, it was beyond the top. And it was like, oh, what? That's weird. Why is the pressure like, because what normally happens is, you put cheese in the press, you set it at 50 pounds. And especially like for that first press over the half hour, it goes way down. So like you look at it and it goes down because the whey is draining out. And so now it's like at 20 pounds. So you have to like crank it up more to increase the pressure back to 50 pounds where it's supposed to be pressing initially. And again, don't hold me to those numbers because this is dependent upon what kind of cheese you're making. They're different. This is just an example. So anyway, thankfully we looked at it because I don't know what would have happened. As it was over 100 pounds of pressure. And so my husband had to really muscle down. I can't lift 100 pounds. So thankfully he was there and he could do this. So because he had to like muscle down and hold the cheese press as he unscrewed it or loosened, like he loosened everything. And it was still insanely interesting. And then when he pulled the cheese out, it looked like a sponge because it was something was growing in there, but it was not the culture that we put in there. There was some kind of wild something growing in there that caused it to look like a sponge. And I don't mean like Swiss cheese, because the reason there's holes in Swiss cheese and some other cheeses is because of the formation of gas. This was not like this. This really looked like a sponge with like thousands of tiny little gassy air pockets in there when we cut it open, and having no idea what it was. Like, we were afraid to even feed that to the chickens or the pigs. So that just got thrown away. And we're like, oh dear, we must have accidentally contaminated it with something. Maybe the spoon that we pulled out of the drawer to stir the curds wasn't clean or something. So we did it again. And guess what? Same thing, happened again. And I don't remember if we had to do it a third time or not before we realized that, oh, the culture is bad. Because of course, like the second time we were being super careful, making sure all of our equipment was clean and sterile and everything. So like there should have been zero risk of contamination with any kind of wild yeast or wild bacteria or anything like that. So that's another possibility. People ask me like, how do you know if your cheese is okay or if it's gone bad? And I can tell you that in 21 years of making cheese, every single time that something went bad, it was obvious to us. I had a batch of yogurt that went bad one time, and a 4-year-old would not have touched that stuff. I went and I removed the top, and it looked like I had a bowl of frosting. Like, it looked like whipped frosting, and it was all the way to the top of the container. And when I lifted that off, it looked like skim milk underneath. And it stunk to high heaven. So like, there is no way anybody would have gone, yogurt. It did not look or smell like yogurt. So it was super obvious that something had gone wrong. Probably some kind of wild yeast got into it, because of contamination from like a spoon that wasn't clean or something like that we used to stir it. So those are some of the things that can go wrong. And I hope this doesn't feel overwhelming to anybody, like, oh my gosh, this is impossible, because it's really not. You just have to follow the directions. And I know this is going to be harder for those of you who cook like I used to, which was, a little of this, a little of that. Oh, I don't have any carrots to put in this stew. Oh, fine, I'll just put potatoes in, put in more potatoes. Or put in some radishes or rutabagas or something, I'll just use another root vegetable. You can't do that with cheese. I had a student one time who wanted to make Chev, but she didn't want to buy any rennet. So she thought she could substitute vinegar for the culture. She thought she could substitute vinegar for the culture to make Chev. And it's like, no, you can't do that. Vinegar makes acid ripened cheeses. Culture makes culture ripened cheeses. So there's a huge difference. Very few cheeses can be made using vinegar or some type of acid. The vast majority of cheeses, like 95% of cheeses, are culture ripened. So all of those details that look so nitpicky really are very important, especially if you want to make aged cheeses, because I did okay. I mean, I did good enough with like my Chev and my mozzarella and yogurt and stuff that, within a year or so after making those, I was trying to make cheddar and they were failing miserably. I had black mold growing, veining through. So like, again, black mold, bad. Blue mold, okay. Black mold, bad. Red mold, okay. Black mold, bad. So anyway, you can't even feed that to the pigs or the chickens. So I would pitch that. And after failing multiple times with my cheddar, that's when I finally said to my husband, you know what? I think you need to help with this, because your hard cheeses are going to have instructions like raise your temperature 2 degrees every 5 minutes for a total of 10 degrees in 30 minutes. And I thought, oh, that is the most ridiculous thing. They want me to raise the temperature by 10 degrees. Okay, crank up the heat, 5 minutes later, all right, I'm up 10 degrees. I'm good. I wasn't willing to do that. And my husband's an engineer. And so he's the guy who loves to check time and temperature. He loves spreadsheets. Y'all know I share a lot of his spreadsheets about kid weight gain and stuff, milking and stuff like that. So he's the numbers guy. So I said, you know what? I really think you would love making cheese. And once I convinced him to do it, he was absolutely hooked. And that was actually what got him interested in the goats. Before he started making cheese, he wasn't really interested in the goats. So he started helping with the goats after he started making cheese. And then that even moved into making wine, because that's another type of fermentation. So some people turn into fermentation junkies, once they start with the cheese, and they move on to like wine and beer and vegetables and all kinds of other stuff. And so he still says he's going to do beer someday, but he hasn't yet. So in addition to having freezer or refrigerator coolers, so in our basement, we have coolers full of cheese and we have lots of wine aging. So that's why somebody once said to me, if I ever have to stay in somebody's basement for a long time, I want it to be your basement because we have lots of wine and cheese down there. So you would not starve. So I hope this has been helpful. If you've tried to make cheese in the past, just know that it is not impossible. You just need to have the right recipe, and you need to follow that recipe, and you make sure that all of your ingredients are good. So that means you need to buy them from reputable sources. I was going to circle back to fermentation shops and like Amish grocery stores and stuff. So a lot of beer and wine shops will have cheese stuff in like one little section of their store, because again, like I said, some people turn into fermentation junkies and they want to make all the ferments. Not so sure I would trust them, because if they have a very small section and they don't actually make cheese themselves, and they're only selling, and they're not selling their rennet and their cultures fast enough, that could be bad. Also, if they are not storing their rennet in the refrigerator and they're rennet in the refrigerator and culture in the freezer, then it's not going to be any good. That is a problem I had. In the beginning, we would take our chickens and turkeys to Arthur, which is that Amish community. We would take our chickens and turkeys down there to be processed. And while they were at the processor, I would go shopping at the Amish grocery stores, which I thought was a great place to buy my yogurt culture. Like, hey, they've got the yogurt culture. It's cheaper here. And so I was buying yogurt culture from there. And the first time I bought it, the yogurt turned out perfect. The next time I bought it, all of the yogurt was failing and I didn't know why. And I was very frustrated. And the next time I bought it, there's only like five packets in a box. So then the next time I bought it, it worked again. So I didn't understand. I'm like, it didn't occur to me why my yogurt was failing sometimes until I discovered, like one day I was looking at the package and it said keep refrigerated. And it finally clicked that in that Amish grocery store, it was not in a refrigerator. It was sitting out on the shelf. So it was really a matter of like, oh, well, maybe if the culture just got delivered last week and it's only been sitting on the shelf for a week and I bring it home and put it in my fridge, it's okay. But if it's been sitting on the shelf for a couple months and I bring it home, it's not going to work anymore. So I don't know exactly where it goes from working to not working, like if a few days, obviously a few days at room temperature is okay because they ship the cheese, they ship through the mail. And I've never had any problem with it being shipped through the mail. But clearly there's definitely a time at which storing it at the improper temperature is going to be detrimental. So that's why it's really important to make sure that you're buying your culture and your rennet from reputable sources. So this also means I wouldn't buy it from somebody on Amazon because, again, you have no idea. Did they, you have no idea how long the culture and the rennet has been in storage at their place once they purchased it. So I hope this has been helpful. If you have questions, please feel free to post in the comment section below. We can also give you more information about the cheesemaking class, the home dairy class at Thrifty Homesteader Academy, if you're interested in that. So I hope this has been helpful. Take care. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Next week, I'm going to go ahead and talk about why soap making can be so hard because it's kind of the same deal. Sometimes people try soap making and it fails terribly and they just wind up dumping everything. And then sometimes people have inconsistent results and they don't know why. So I'm going to talk about that next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.